Hola, mi gente. Buenas noches. Good evening, my friends. Welcome back to the Found in Translation Talk Show, where we stack truth on today's hottest issues and the politics impacting Latinos and all Americans. And we bring you that perspective from a diverse perspective. This is Jose Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. For our radio audience, you're listening to WPPMLP 106.5 FM radio in Philadelphia. Again, thank you so much for joining us in Philadelphia Radio Land. Hashtag People Powered Media. For the podcast audience, my ride or dies, you're listening all over the country, all over the world, on every podcast platform imaginable: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. I was looking at our numbers, and of course, we bring back our intrepid regular co-host and producer, Elbert Garcia. You know, Elbert, good evening, Elbert. Say hello.
Hey, man. How you doing, Ray?
I'm doing fantastic, brother. Happy post-Labor Day weekend. Of course, we celebrated the work of workers and our laborers, and we're going to talk later with some of the people that are doing the real work in this country. Of course, I'm talking about our Latina educators. But LB, I was looking at our stats earlier, and the Spotify audience is very international. We have a group of Chileans that listen to us exclusively on Spotify. I would love for them to chime in one day and explain to us why they make el mejor ceviche en el mundo, right? That's always the proverbial battle from some of our South American friends. But again, thank you so much for joining our podcast audience. And for us, those watching on Facebook Live, yes, we're live, boy. Thank you so much for watching us here on this live platform. You're also going to see this video on YouTube and Periscope and other digital platforms. So again, however form you're watching us, we appreciate you. Again, this is Jose Collazo on the Found in Translation Talk Show. This is really the back to school episode. A little later in the show in moments, we're going to have Tanya Valencia, an education policy expert from Unidos US, as well as a teacher that's in the classroom, grinding it out every day, educating our youth. Eva Mendez, a true A-lister, is going to join us also later in the show. And of course, we're also going to involve, we're not educators, LB, but we're very concerned parents and daddies. And I know the issue of education is very close to your heart.
Definitely, Ray. Look, I've got a 10-year-old. I've worked for a number of years in the nonprofit sector with middle school students. And the truth is that, they always say that the children are our future. But the reality is that nowadays, not only are their future, but they're making things happen in the present right now. The young activists, they're organizers. They're definitely swaying and making trends on social media, whether you're talking about, I don't even know what the generations are called these days, extennials, millennials, like however you call them, however you want to kind of dice it.
Is there someone younger than Z, I guess? Would Nadia be a Z? I guess she'd still be in the Z category, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely think she definitely would be it and been there.
Yeah. But yeah, needless to say, we're gonna talk about the perspective as parents, as fathers, as Latino activists. We're gonna have Tanya Valencia and Eva Mendez join us in a moment. But we wanted to start the show, and again, you're watching the Found in Translation Talk Show. If you want to continue the conversation with us on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, RAYS Podcast, IG Ray's Latino Talk. LB, where can they continue these conversations with you before, during, and after the show?
Well, you can always reach me. You can always reach me on social media sorry about that. You can always reach me on social media at Elbert Garcia FL, at Elbert Garcia FL. That's always either on Facebook, on Twitter, and I'm not that much on Instagram, but a couple of people been gnawing me to get on my Instagram feed better, so you'll still see me there.
And if you want to let people know, Elbert, if they want to join us in this conversation, obviously they can leave comments in the Facebook chat. You're going to be monitoring that as a producer of today's show, and if there's any other way they can join us on video, let them know how they can do that.
Well, the easiest and best way is to you're watching this on Facebook Live, or if you're, if you're on Twitter, definitely tweet out. We're always here at you can hashtag at either Week in Review, or you can always hashtag us at POC Pundits, POC Pundits. Definitely drop a line, drop some comments there. We'll be also following that. But our main feed tonight is through our folks on Facebook. Facebook always gives us a lot of love, so please drop your comments there. We'll see them. We'll put them on screen when we can. And if not, we'll definitely make sure that your questions, your comments are always well represented here, on the show.
Sounds good. And we wanted to dedicate the show and dedicate the beginning portion of this program to discussing not only the memory, the legacy, but sort of what these tragedies mean for all of us as we as we sort of review the week. Of course, I'm referring to first of all, those children are still in cages. We still have people in very inhumane conditions being incarcerated, tortured. Many children, including many children on our southern border. So hashtag close the camps. We ain't forgetting about nobody here on Found in Translation. Of course, our thoughts and prayers and mucho sentimiento, mucho. I mean, so much for the families and of course the victims of the latest. It's almost a daily, weekly occurrence here in this country of the terrible terrorist attack, domestic violence attack that took place in Midland, Odessa, and Western Texas, including 6 people of color, 5 Latinos, and we're going to talk about that piece in a moment. And but our thoughts, the first people we wanted to shout out and spend a moment discussing our family in the Bahamas, who just experienced an incredible force of nature with Hurricane Dorian parking over some of the Grand Bahama and Abaco Islands that are part of the beautiful Bahamian Islands. You know, Elbert Garcia as a Caribbean Latino that now lives in South Florida, but also has very close ties to the West Indian community in New York City and South Florida. I know that the Bahamian community is front of mind for us this week.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've got family and friends who are out there. I mean, I was just visiting folks, and visiting the island this summer. And when you hear about just the destruction, right? I mean, like this was a hurricane. My mother was joking with me. She was like, se parece como cogió un novio y no quería irse. Like literally, like parked out there in front. And didn't want to go, right? And so, in essence, through the course of literally the 24 to 48 hours that it was there, it went from a Category 4 to a Category 5. I mean, you had, water rising, 20, 25 feet, some really horrible conditions. And, from Miami and South Floridians, you really can see the connection that people have with the Caribbean community. In instances and times like this, right? I mean, like South Florida, Miami specifically, wouldn't really be anywhere without the Bahamian community. They literally helped build the city. They literally helped vote it into existence. And so there's a lot of going back and forth, business ties, economic ties, social ties, and so you're seeing really a lot of folks coming out there. You got city councilmen and Congress people. And not just folks of color, but everybody, right? Kind of saying and letting their hands. I mean, every fire station house from here through Fort Lauderdale is collecting supplies. You've got a lot of really great community partners who are not just collecting materials and relief in the community, but also being able to take them and ship them and working with folks locally on the ground there in the Bahamas, which is really important because I think a lot of times that we see, and no disrespect to the larger relief organizations like the Red Cross or anything else like that, but a lot of times also some of that, sometimes in some of these natural disaster situations, things get stuck in the bureaucracy. We saw that a lot with Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And so it's important to have strong community partners, folks on the ground, not just governmental folks, but also non-governmental folks, to be able to hit everybody in a full, in a full wide net, right? To go into places where other people can't, because that's what's really important.
Jose, of course, shout out to, I mean, you talk about a saint, that brother, El Español, Jose Andres, the incredible chef. And I mean, you talk about someone that's now become a world-renowned expert on disaster relief, this man, who's continuing to support our victims and our family in the Bahamas. A lot of people, a lot of people just don't realize we don't take enough time to really consider the contributions of so many of these groups in the country. I think it'll be about, when the earthquake took place in Haiti several years ago, and so many Haitian celebrities, amazing Haitian Americans, that people just didn't realize, the Maxwells, just so many. And then, now in this instance, we're reminded how much of a contribution the Bahamian American community and Bahamians live to our world. I mean, just a cursory Google search, Sidney Poitier, possibly one of America's greatest actor of all times. Esther Roll from Good Times.
Esther, oh my God.
Al Roker. Of course, for my ballers, you got 2 emerging NBA superstars, Buddy Hield and Eitan Aton Thomas from the Center for the Phoenix Suns. DeAndre Ayton. I'm sorry, Aton Thomas went to Syracuse. So that's just a small sample of the kind of contributions the Bahamian community lives in our country. And I think it's really important that Latinos, people of the Caribbean background, and especially Caribbean Latinos, and especially Puerto Ricans, stand up especially strong in our supportive efforts because of two reasons. One, the Bahamian community, of course, we have, again, notable celebrities, notable activists, but they're a very small population. There's not 500,000 Bahamians in the world. And they're not, even though they're their own separate nation. So their political influence and their voice in this country are very limited. So even when Puerto Ricans, as a colony of the United States, and of course, 8 million Puerto Ricans strong in this country, we had relatively much more political influence and voice to raise our voice. We had the larger Latino family. We have 4 Puerto Rican members of Congress. We have, Puerto Ricans that have political influence in states like Florida and New York and throughout the country. We have the Puerto Rican celebrity class that has a large platform. So, and we know what the needs are. We know, I've already seen my friends like Wanda Mora, like Natasha Cotero, our friends in South Florida, the Puerto Rican community in Florida, being very active in these relief efforts. We know what is needed because we just went through this tragedy. We did a dress rehearsal for the Bahamas. So I really encourage anyone listening to the show, but particularly Latinos and people of Caribbean descent, because we really are a Caribbean family, and we have to stand up for the Bahamian community because they have a very little voice here. And the other thing is I want to share, and Elbert is throughout the show is going to put links, and we're going to tweet out these links. I've been very encouraged because on one hand, people have been very generous. I mean, non-Bahamians, across our social network, LB, have been very strong in wanting to support and donate. And of course, you have it now in the Chiron for Hurricane Dorian relief. But at the same time, they also were leery of just jumping on the first GoFundMe that they saw. So I think the diligence combined with being shrewd around how we donate our money and how we support, because as we found, LB, for the Puerto Rico situation, Hurricane Maria, we were out of just wanting to do something, we were collecting a lot of these water bottles. And as we realized that may not be the best way to get people water on the island, filtration systems. Right. So we're learning, unfortunately, through these tragedies, but this is a way we went through, I feel as a Puerto Rican, we went through that tragedy in some small way to help our Bahamian brothers and sisters now, because we've gone through it and we have some expertise in this subject. So we're going to continue to support our Bahamian brothers and sisters. The other thing, LB, we wanted to discuss in the first leg of the show is, of course, where do we go from Midland, Odessa? One of the things, of course, it's a terrible tragedy and every life is precious. But one of the things we found very interesting, which we wanted to note on the Found in Translation talk show, is that although 5 of the 7 victims were Latinos, 6 or 7 were people of color, there was no mention of this potentially even being having either a racial or a terroristic or hate crime element to it. Now, we'll never know. The man has passed away now, but it's very interesting that that's not even considered a possibility. Very similar to the Dayton situation where the gentleman went into a largely black nightclub and it was sort of brushed off as not a strong possibility. At the end of the day, how important is it? It's hard to tell because that wouldn't bring back these people's lives. But I think it's very important for us to note that we continue to be attacked and we have to be vigilant and bringing up the lens of equity in all facets of this conversation.
Yeah, and I think you have, and there'll always be discussions and questions about whether or not, what's the racial aspect and whether or not someone had a specific intent to it. But I was alarmed. I was caught. I guess what caught my attention today or the last 24 hours was this little debate that was going on between Representative Crenshaw and Representative
in AOC.
I always say AOC, but I have to give her proper respect to say in terms of representative. And she, what was interesting in terms of this conversation, they hear they're going about it, and this this representative here from Crenshaw is talking about, well, these background checks, it's almost as if this is an undue burden for folks who, for regular, gun carriers. And his response to her response to him was like, well, you shouldn't just, he was like, well, this would stop me from being able to lend my gun to my friend, right? And as if a gun is a car, right? And it's like, oh, we're hanging out. Hey, why don't you take my gun, right? And she was like saying, and she says that, look, you never know. You could be lending your gun to someone who has had, some past crimes, or even potentially been stopped for domestic violence or having some sort of issue. And then he took it to offense to say, like, oh, are you telling me my friends are somehow either potentially criminals or domestic abusers? And again,
well, we know they can't pass a background check, my man.
But that's the thing, right? Like if you're
they're not responsible enough to at least go through the process,
right? I
mean,
they
feel privileged to want to subvert the process of carrying a gun. Where in our community, if we drive around with our driver's licenses, they take our car, they suspend our license,
they deport us, right?
They shoot up our insurance rates, they deport us.
Right. I mean, it's crazy, right? And then again, but think about it this way too, Ray. Like, and again, I think a lot of times people make a lot of comments or trying to make similarities between like, owning a gun and potentially like owning a car, right? And the responsibilities that one has that, right? And it's like, yeah, you could definitely lend your car to anybody, right? And you could even lend your car to someone who doesn't have a license, whose name is supposed to even be on the insurance ticket, right? But the thing is that when you do that, you begin to assume the liability of the actions of that person, right? So the real question has to be like, well, if you're going to be able to lend your gun to any person, are you going to take the liability? If that person even sells that gun, perhaps, and it winds up in Chicago, are you going to be taking up the liability of whether or not that then is then used in a drive-by or in a shootout or anything like that? Because I think if we begin to think about it that way, then you might find some of these issues around gun violence and whether or not, what's the proper role of ownership and guns to be taken a little bit different.
Very, very good point, Elbert, because one of the things, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but one of the strategies that in urban street crime, and Tania's in the on deck circle, Elbert, so let's bring her up as I finish this point, is that in urban street crime, one of the big issues is straw purchases, right? So if you legally buy a gun and you give it to your boyfriend, a lot of times it's the male-female dynamic, right? Like your man's got a record, but whatever, he needs some heat, and you buy it because you're clean, and then he does something with it. That those women, particularly those women, are starting to get incarcerated at much harsher rates than they used to. And you can argue that, and I would probably argue that that's probably correct. But my point is that on the flip side, now we're talking about another type of gun owner. The profile's different, and what's to say that not only should there be more of a focus on closing those loopholes, thinking about these gun show loopholes, which is freaking ridiculous. That it's just another way to buy it, and so it's open season, but also to create. It's like the immigration debate, Elbert, right? Like, they deport the worker who got lured to work at the place, but they don't charge, they don't hold accountable to the business owner, who tends to be an elite white person, many times males who are Republicans, who may donate to these candidates. And it's interesting because it's almost like in the case of Mississippi that it was almost an inside job because it happened to be the one facility where the Latino workers had just won a recent victory around labor rights, in particular gender harassment and gender discrimination. You're watching and listening to the Found in Translation talk show. You can be watching this on many platforms. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We are on the Raised Latino Talk podcast feed. If you want to subscribe to the show, and always you can listen to us at WPPMLP Philadelphia 106.5 Tuesdays at 11 o'clock. Shout out to our executive producer of the radio program, Vanessa Maria Graber. And I want to show Vanessa this. Bring up Tanya Valencia up to the stage. Oh, look at Tanya. So Tanya is all smiles, and I'm going to show her. I got to give it. You're going to appreciate it. I got to show her the t-shirt I'm wearing tonight here.
Nice.
And of course, I want to give a shout out to my cousin, Tiffany Sierra, and my homegirl, Ana Montañez, who's also my Sofrito Connect. Very important stuff. We talk about supporting our small business owners. They're the ones that developed this shirt and organized the Occupy El Barrio campaign a few years ago. If you don't know who the man is on the shirt, Google him. That's all I got to say. Pedro Bispo Campos is our North Star. Tanya Valencia, welcome to the show, my friend. Say hello to everybody.
Hey.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes.
Super random, but I was so down as soon as Raf told me, hey, I'd like to bring you on for this Ed special.
We wanted to do this back to school episode. We get busy. Labor Day happens. We're all busy at work. And I'm like, who better than Tanya? So, and Tanya is a relatively new coworker of mine on Unidos US, but has also not only become a great colleague, friend, and also a great supporter of the show. Tanya, I know you wanted, we want to touch on a few things, and I know we're going to have another educator come on the show in a moment, but why don't you introduce your role with Unidos, and then tell us why this conversation is so important to you. You said you really wanted to share your personal story to kind of put this conversation in context around back to school, issues impacting our children education. And I think your story is very relatable to a lot of people that are going to listen and watch this episode of Found in Translation.
Awesome. So my name is Tania Valencia, and I am a policy analyst for Unidos US, specifically education and K-12. And so what my role is to, look at what's going on at the federal level, possibly things that are going well, but also we know that there are some things in education that definitely are not going well. And so what are some of those things that at the national level we should be advocating for, that we should be supporting, but also what are some of the trends that are happening that we should also, voice some type of opposition towards? And so that's where my role fits in. But prior to this, I was an educator myself. And so I taught fourth grade English language arts. And I've just always known that, for me at least, education was always the niche that I wanted to work in. But I didn't necessarily know exactly what that role would look like for me. And so I did a few, opportunities for myself in terms of like learning what the education realm is. So at one point I was an organizer for teachers. I worked behind the scenes and I was like a front desk secretary for some schools. And then, which eventually led me to actually teach in the schools themselves. But before that, at least for me, the reason that I've always been focused in education is that for my family, I'm a first generation American. So my family's from El Salvador.
Much respect to our Salvies out there. I'm about to tell you, we're going to talk about pupusas later, but of course,
heck yeah.
we got a lot of love for El Salvadorans, my man. We don't even got to discuss that. That's from the jump. Much respect. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah. So super proud daughter of an immigrant family. And then I went on to become a first generation college student. So I was the first one in my family to go through the college experience here in the US and to graduate. And so for me, I always saw education as my liberation. And that to me was just always like the little seed that stayed throughout all my years in education. And I just want to share one quote that really relates to why I do the work that I do. And so it's by James Baldwin. And it says that the paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become more conscious, one begins to examine the society in which she is being educated or he is being educated. So, that is exactly why I do the work that I do, because I can question the world and I can think critically and I can analyze and I can problem solve. And I want more students out there, more kids, to have the opportunity to also do that for themselves and to really go on and like do even bigger and better things than any of us have ever done so far. So that's really where I come from and why I do the work that I do.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, Tanya. We're going to bring on another educator in a second. Eva, just hold on for a second, but I want Tanya to share this one piece, and then we'll bring you into this conversation. Again, you're watching and listening to the Found in Translation Talk Show. We got some Latina educators in the building. Go to school us for the next 35 minutes. Tanya, Valencia, and Eva Mendez, our back to school issue. So wonderful to see all the pictures the last few weeks, all of our friends' kids, and I wish them all blessings. My kids started today, 3rd and 5th grade. So it's a beautiful time of year. Great to see everyone's children engaging in education. And Tanya, your story is very relatable to so many of us. Tanya, when we were doing a little prep for the show, you really schooled me this afternoon because you shared a few comments which really resonated. And the first, concepts that impact our children in school. And I want you to answer, bring one to the table, then we're going to bring Eva Mendez into this conversation. Can you talk to us about spirit murdering? And I'd never heard that concept. And a lot of the conversation that you and I had today to get ready for the show really did come down to identity and how, as whether it's diverse communities, but particularly Latino communities, prepare our children for what they're going to face in various school environments. So this concept of spirit murdering was very captivating to me. Can you share a little bit about that concept, and then we'll bring Eva into this conversation with us?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times in schools, we hear about situations that are happening. So, for example, in New York, four 12-year-old girls, they were Black and Latina. They were acting too hyper, too giddy in the hallway. Like a lot of times it does happen in schools, but what the school did is that they didn't recognize their joy for what it was as, little 12-year-old girls, and actually strip searched them to see if they had drugs on them. And so in the end, there were never drugs found. And the parents are actually in a lawsuit right now. But things like these are what some people would consider spirit murdering of Black and brown children in schools themselves. And that's a coined term by a legal scholar named Patricia Williams, which pretty much means that racism is so much more than just physical pain, and racism ultimately robs people of their humanity and their dignity, and it leaves a lot of lasting personal, psychological, spiritual injuries. And so when we lose protection, and we lose nurture, and we lose acceptance of our students in schools, those are things that ultimately do not help them in their academics, because they need that safety, they need that nurture, they need that acceptance in order to, safely be able to learn every single day in school, and not going into these types of settings out of fear. And this is one instance, but there are other ways in which things like these are happening across schools at different types of levels. And it doesn't have to get to this type of extreme for somebody to call it, the spirit murdering of the joy of who our students are even before they come to our schools. And a lot of that does have to do with their identities themselves. So at least for example, in my life, so my name is Tanya, and I'm always super proud to pronounce my name that way. But pretty much for all of my K-12 experience, I never pronounced my name that way, because my name was kind of like erased and changed from the time that I was in preschool, because one of my preschool teachers just couldn't pronounce Tanya. So I became Tania throughout my entire school experience. And it took literally all the way up until my 20s for me to find a way to reclaim my name and try to take ownership of an identity, a piece of my identity that was taken away through happen in the school systems. And so, something as simple as a student's name is crucial to be able to acknowledge and address them in the ways that they want to. And I even saw that in my students themselves, how they benefited so much more when, I called them by their names that their families had given them, and always called them every single day at home.
Well, Tanya, if you know the story, that the reason I call myself my sort of moniker, my nickname on my podcast and talk show is Ray. Of course, my name is Rafael, right? And the reason for that is that my dad, who's Rafael Sr., when he started going to school in the United States in the late 60s, mid 60s, they couldn't pronounce his name in the Bronx and then in North Philly. So they, cut it short, and eventually it became Ray, just because of, the name kept getting chopped up and anglicized. So I'm Ray Jr., and that's kind of the germination of that. And so that's a really important conversation, because and that gets into policing, sort of like discipline in schools, right, Tanya? Because, if we act gregariously, we might get punished, or we may have less of a rope to express ourselves. And, little things. Some of us just talk louder, like I do. Puerto Ricans talk with our hands. Can that be seen as aggressive? And these kind of, or the opposite, when Latinos are overly obedient and looking down, well, you're not looking in my eyes. You're not being respectful. Well, actually, it's our attempt to be super respectful. We want to bring another Latina educator in this conversation, a true A-lister. Eva Mendez is back. It's been too long, my friend. Say hello to the family out there, Eva.
Hi, how are you? How's everybody doing?
Very good, very good. We got Eva Mendez here. Tanya Valencia, as someone who has been in the classroom as a teacher, is now doing policy work as a colleague of mine at Unidos US. Jump into this conversation, Eva. I know you were getting your technical stuff set up, but Tanya was really talking about this concept of spirit murdering, which which really speaks to how do we support our children in school so they can be not only safe which is kind of everyone's first concern. Unfortunately, nowadays, it wasn't back in the days as much, but also feel nurtured, supported to be who they are in every way. So just your initial thoughts as an educator. How are you making that happen in the classroom for our young people?
Well, it's kind of difficult. I do want to piggyback on something that Tanya was saying about learning how to pronounce students' names. I'm a Spanish teacher, and some of the things that my colleagues say is, "Oh, do you give them a Spanish name?" And I say, "No. Why give them a Spanish name? I just respect their name, that their birth name, whatever their name is, their parents gave them." And sometimes the kids don't understand that, and I tell them, I said, "No, I'm going to respect the name that your parents gave you." And I always tell them, if I mess up your name, please fix me. That's your right. Fix me.
That's right.
And it might take, excuse me, it might take me a couple times to get fixed, but once I get fixed, I'm good. And I would always tell them. And sometimes, like right now, I'm teaching sixth to eighth graders, so they find everything funny. So if I mispronounce their names, they chuckle, and I kind of chuckle with them, and I say, "No, it's okay, fix me." And I give them the platform to that they should always be respected, and that someone should always be pronouncing their name correctly.
Absolutely. Tanya, again, you were schooling me all afternoon, my friend. Tanya, you brought to my attention a campaign that our bilingual educators around the country have kicked off to respect our children's identity. Can you share some information about that? Because that ties in to a tool that we can use and a technique potentially that we can help our students feel comfortable, whether it's a new environment, new school. Some of our kids are moving into another, elementary to middle to high school, what have you. They might be new in a community or a school. So that I thought that was a very interesting campaign that you flagged for me earlier today.
Yeah, for sure. So clearly, identity matters so much to us. And so, what the Santa Clara County Office of Education and the National Association of Bilingual Education are doing is that they're promoting what's called the My Name, My Identity campaign. And this is for what they're calling the Getting to Know Our Names Week, which goes hand in hand with, back to school, because this is a time period when everyone's starting to get to know each other. Even if they've seen each other last year, everything's all new for them. So what this campaign does is that they actually formed lesson plans and a few days of curriculum, which, having been a former educator, when you actually get given lesson plans and curriculum, it's a big deal. So this curriculum is actually designed to, promote the importance of what it could look like for them to, take ownership and take claim over their identities. And, with what Eva was saying earlier, like when they see us as their teachers, when they see us in front of them every single day, they turn to us as the people who can, empower them and who can help them. And so we have that responsibility to also, educate ourselves and do what we can. Like Eva was saying, I'm going to respect the name that your parents gave you. That's intentional. That's a decision that she made as an educator. And so that is a responsibility that we have ourselves. So with this tool, is something that, if you're hearing about it for the first time today, maybe this is something you could take back to your school, or you could recommend to some like the fellow educators, or, if you're a parent and you want to see something in your school, maybe even like try to recommend this in a PTA meeting or something like that. But it's really, really important that, like we stay engaged as educators ourselves, but parents, also step in when you want to see things moving in your schools, because that is the school's role as well.
And LB will tweet that information, that link, and LB, if you could we'll definitely get that out there, and you can comment. We're gonna engage our friends on Facebook, particularly if they have questions for folks. Eva and Tanya Valencia are educators that are on the show. Eva, I was actually referring to our producer Elbert. He has an E2, so he's in charge of dealing with the comments. So you just focus on the show. So it's funny. I forgot that nuance. But behind the scenes stuff here on Found in Translation. Eva, let's get back to you for a second. You're a teacher. You've been in the classroom here at the beginning of the year. We got a lot of parents watching this, a lot of people caring about our kids, caregivers of a lot of different different scenarios, grandparents that are raising their grandkids, dads, stepmoms, just a lot of people want to care about these kids. So just if there's parents out there watching this, listening to this, concerned, like, how do I get my kid, to new school, new grade, new environment? Give us some thoughts about how they can support preparing their children for the school year.
Yeah, for sure. So I will say that there's like 5 points that I would say that are really important for you to keep abreast in what's going on with your kids. I will say that as the generations change, it's getting a little bit more difficult. But I think one of the main important things is don't be afraid to keep your kids on a routine. The more you get involved and keep them on a routine, not only are you preparing them for real life, going to work every day and fulfilling expectations as an adult, but you're also setting boundaries for them and making sure that there is that line, and also letting them know that you care enough to keep them on a routine. As much as they fight us, they love that discipline and they love that routine. Before schools, don't wait for schools to start to give them a bedtime. Give them that bedtime couple days before so that they can start building up. The summer is a long 2.5 months for them. They're all out, their schedules are all out of whack. So as soon as you get them back in that routine, it's going to be easier for that first, second, and third day of school to get back into getting up early and going to sleep at a normal time. Minimize their phone usage. Studies show that if we keep on our uh, phones until the minute we fall asleep, we don't sleep as well. I know my son is 17 years old, and people can judge me if they want to, but I still give him a bedtime, and I still anytime whatever his bedtime is, an hour before he has to what I call unplug. So I tell him I don't care what you do after you unplug, but you can't be on the phone, you can't be on social media, can't do anything like that. So that's a great starting point. Once your kid goes to school, they're going to come back those first few days inundated with paperwork. Take a minute as a parent to read that paperwork. I know I sit down at the table and I read over. It's usually like rules and syllabi and expectations. Don't be afraid to reread that with your student, with your child. It also sends the message that you are involved and that you know what's going on. And on that paperwork, generally there's contact information of all your students, your child's teachers. Feel free to send them an email. Say, hi, I'm so glad that my son Billy is in your class. Jose can't wait to take math with you, so on and so forth. That just gives the teacher the heads up that you are also involved. Unfortunately, I must say I am a teacher and I know what goes on in our inside in the teacher from the teacher perspective. We tend to get boggled down either with the great kid who's going above and beyond, or we get involved with the kid that gives us a lot of discipline problems. We get inundated with the politics, and we tend to forget the average kid, that middle of the road kid. So once we get an email from a parent, we know, well, that's not a kid we need to forget about, and we make sure to we're more apt to stay abreast with that child and keep the parents in the loop with that child. Um, and stay connected. Every school has an online component. I know my son's school uses Genesis. Learn your login, because Genesis is that online component with your child. So if your child is to get in trouble and there's a discipline referral, you have access to that. If your child is missing paperwork for the school nurse, you now have access to that. If your teacher assigned an assignment that is due in a week, it's generally in the system and you right away can see, and then you can come home to your child and say, hey, listen, I heard Mr. Peterson just assigned chapter 1 and 2. Did you get that did you get that read? Did you get that done? Did you answer the questions? Do you have any problems? You might not know what's going on, but your child doesn't know that. So your child is like, oh, how do you know that that chapter 4 was due?
Keeping up
and
on them. That's right.
and
Yeah.
then they all of a sudden they tend to turn a little bit. um Another thing about once you know what's going on, you're being able to ask those specific questions. I know every parent says, how was school today? And every child in America says the same thing: good. And they say, what you learn today? Nothing. So you went to school for 6 to 8 hours and learned absolutely nothing. Something is wrong. So if you ask specific questions like, oh, I heard that you were going over a bullying assembly today, and then they're like, a bullying assembly? How do you know that I had a bullying assembly? So again, that just keeps your child like on their toes. And another way that you can help your child stay on task is to don't believe. I have this phrase called "don't believe the hype." So a lot of times, as school year does continue, children might come home or students might come home saying, "Oh, such and such doesn't like me," or "That's the hardest teacher. I got the hardest teacher." I have this other saying that says, if you believe everything that your child says happens at school, I'm going to start as a teacher, I'm going to start believing everything that your child says happens at home. So I will say that if there's a question, um, don't believe the hype. If you have a question about something, email the teacher, stay in the loop. Again, once that teacher sees that you're in the loop, they tend to be more in the loop with you, and you'll be able to work together as a team because it takes a village to raise that child.
Well, yeah, staying involved and letting, and it's also a strong message. Let your kid know you're going to stay involved. You're going to be
Right.
diligent about it. I think setting the tone early is really important. Tanya, as someone that's also been in the classroom, but also now is sort of leading and helping us craft policies to support our children. How were Eva's comments? I'm sure they were very relatable to your experience and some of the work you're working on now.
So relatable. Ooh, I know when you mentioned don't believe the hype. I It's hilarious sometimes. Some of the situations I would find myself in, based off of one thing that a student told to their parent. Their parent thankfully would come talk to me, and we would clarify things out. But a lot of times, what did happen with me, being an educator, the students thought that I didn't like them because
Mhm.
I was pushing them too hard, or I was, just being the most or being extra. But in reality, I wasn't giving anyone any different, preferred type of treatment. It was because I knew that my students, had great potential, and I was absolutely not going to let them, do anything beyond less of what I knew they were capable of. And so in that process, in that frustration, sometimes my students, being kids, would go back home and tell their parents, "Oh, Miss Valencia doesn't like me." But no, it's because we see as educators, that they're capable of so much more. And it would get to the point where I would have to tell the kids right there in the class, like, I know that your mom would absolutely not be okay with you, sitting here in my class and putting your head on the table.
All right, so let me, yeah, so Tanya and Eva, I want to post something to you, because one of the things, and look, the teachers in our lives. I mean, y'all, the God bless the work y'all do. But one of the things that I've seen is that in certain school environments, and maybe it's just a dynamic with what, like you said, Eva. There's the stars, there's the headaches, and then the ones in the middle kind of get forgotten about a lot. Is that oftentimes the schools and the teachers are not setting high enough standards for our kids.
That's
And
Mm.
exactly.
so, as parents and as teachers, in your case, even you have both, you deal with it from both ends. But why don't we start with you, Tanya? Jump in this conversation, because how, as parents, and I know, Tanya, the particular issues that you're dealing with as it relates to our English language learners, our Latino kids or other children that their English is not their first language. Oftentimes, those parents have even an extra challenge trying to have their voice heard, so that they can have a teacher in a school system that's not only supporting their children but pushing their child in a way that's positive. So Tanya and Eva, jump in that conversation, because that's something that's impacting a lot of us out here.
Um,
And oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go
I
ahead, go ahead.
I just think that that's my passion, and that's probably my ongoing struggle every day. I think when people ask me what I do for a living, a lot of times I don't say teaching because I think that's what I do the least of. I do more advocacy. I work in a
Mm.
district. I don't want to disclose my district, but I do work in a district which is a very large Latino population. But the educators are I'm it in my building. I'm probably it. So
That's
I
incredible, by the way.
yes,
Not knowing where you live in that community. I mean, not, I'm not gonna, but that's amazing.
and I take on that responsibility, and I tend to, and it makes me very angry, and sometimes I allow that passion to um it kind of filters into things that it probably shouldn't, and I'm still learning every day on how to keep it separate. But sometimes I find it impossible because I get caught between a rock and a hard place, because like Tanya said, is that I have extremely high expectations for my students, and probably more so because so many people have low expectations for them. So
Amen.
I combat that struggle because I'm the mean teacher, because every other teacher has made it so easy for these students to attain something, and that's not life. And I have this model that I teach students the same way I want someone to teach my child. Don't make it easy, make it attainable.
Hmm.
So everybody's uh, starting point is definitely at a different place. We understand we have students that are very much under grade level. We have students that are very much above grade level, and we have all of those kids in between. So everybody has a different starting point, and you have to know their starting point in order to make them to show growth. And when you show growth, you've won. You've won. How much they grow, that's a whole nother battle. But if you keep those standards high yet attainable, you're setting them up for success at all times.
Yeah, and I definitely what you shared about, are the standards high enough for certain students? I definitely resonate a lot with that. So I taught in English immersion classroom, and so literally I had like the good majority of my classroom was L, so English learners. And they are the fastest growing group of students across the entire country. And so one thing that we're advocating for, literally related exactly to everything you said, is that we're pushing for what's called native language assessments. At the federal level, we're seeing that 92% of L's English learners are considered below proficient in their fourth grade reading. So that's 92%. If that doesn't cause red flags for people in the ed world, I don't know what would. But what we're seeing is that this 92% of, proficiency where they're at with their, English, it's based off of assessments that are in English for learners who are still in the process of trying to learn the language. And so we know that, for example, like on annual testing at the end of the year, depending on the state's legislations, some of the English learners may be exempt from taking those annual assessments, but some states, do make the students take their annual assessment. And in those cases, some states don't offer them any accommodations. They still expect them to take English tests, and then they consider this measurement, valid in terms of their content knowledge. And odds are that wouldn't necessarily be the case if that student had access to an assessment that was in their native language. And not only that, but also access to a bilingual education, so that, let's say, for example, they don't have to take a Spanish science test at the end of the year if they've never learned, any of that Spanish terminology, or they've never heard it. So that's why, bilingual education goes hand in hand with native language assessments, and that students could definitely benefit from both of those, because we know that, for English learners, especially for them to, master English and to learn it to their best proficiency, they benefit more from learning in both languages rather than, implementing some of these state policies that we're still seeing in 2019, where they're English only acceptable in the schools and in the states.
It's so funny that you say that, because the whole assessment is so important on both aspects. Not only is it's very beneficial to have that um, assessment in their language. So not only are we seeing how proficient they are in their language, because sometimes students are the standards are set lower because, oh, they're ESL students, or they don't speak Spanish, or I mean they don't speak English, they only speak their native tongue. But what we're not realizing, if we don't assess them in their language, we don't know if they are above proficient in their own language. So that's a totally different approach to teaching. So it just could be a language barrier. The language could be the only thing inhibiting them from at their level. I have several students who are probably GT students in their language, but we're treating them as if they were below level. How are we helping them? We're not helping them. And then on the contrary, we have students, because of the ESL laws, they will not allow you to classify a student because they're ESL. So kids that can be uh, special ed needing special ed services, they don't get them because we're not allowed to classify them. So now they're struggling through school, not only with the language barrier, but they're struggling through school because they also have some kind of deficiency. So it's a double-edged sword. It's such a double-edged sword. And having a great bilingual program is key. I mean, like I said, I work in a district with a high Spanish population, and our bilingual program is just the classroom that they're in. It should be so much bigger. I mean, like I said, our population is so huge that I mean I couldn't even begin to.
First, I'm gonna ask you a follow-up question, but I want to pause for a second, and I'm look at my people on Facebook, and of course, people are gonna see this on YouTube, and they're gonna hear it on WPPMLP 106.5 Philadelphia. They're gonna listen to the podcast. Let me tell you something. This level of conversation, which is at the heart of what the national, forget the Latino part, the national political conversation should be. How do we educate this next generation of children, which has a very strong Latino, Spanish-speaking element to it, population, right? So we can have a even more fantastic country instead of this other nonsense. But my point is that where else are you getting this information, people? You know what I mean? And this is why I do this. I don't do it for the great love of, for the cash or, I like to talk to my friends here. But the bottom line is that this is why we have to create platforms to have these conversations, because this is really, look at the experts and look at them all that I was able to bring to the table to have this conversation, this is what's impacting our folks, giving us headaches, giving us strain. This is the conversation you're having in church. This is your cousin calls you, just came to Puerto Rico, doesn't understand the school district. All of these issues are on the front lines. And this is why we bring experts and people that really care about our folks and know what they're talking about, like Tanya and Eva. Eva, we got parents, immigrant parents, people that just came to Puerto Rico post Maria, people that, they're struggling just to kind of stay above water and maybe weren't highly educated themselves where they're from, or for whatever reason, just don't feel comfortable doing all those things you said, the emailing, the, communicating with the teacher. How do we support these parents out there that, that want to help their child, but don't feel like they have the tools because of language barriers, their own education background, and just not having, sometimes the time. I mean, there's a lot of challenges for our parents that even want to get involved to get in the game. So help us with some thoughts about how do we help them get their voice heard in their children's education.
I mean, it's a big struggle. I mean, I don't have all the answers, I know, but I can't emphasize more just the communication and the visibility, being able to be visible in that school. I do know that a lot of Latinos, they are kind of taught to not advocate. Either they're taught to be stay quiet because, again, like you said, that shows respect, but they don't realize the injustice that they're doing to their own child. Not to mention the fact that there's a language barrier. They really don't know what's going on because there is a language barrier. So tap into the language teacher in the building, because at least that language teacher can serve as a translator to get you even started. But that visibility, whenever we see a parent coming in, we never turn them away. And in fact, we try to reach for other people who can help them. I always tell them, you can hit me up off the record, so on and so forth. And I try to give them as much information as possible while keeping my job. So, I will say, and then, there is that time component because a lot of our Latino population does come from working homes. But, once we make that step to be a parent or to be a caretaker, it does come from ourselves as well. So just saying, we can't put all the blame on one person. We each have to, again, take our share to get involved. So the visibility and the contact is the most important. Finding that one person that's going to be your go-to person and just stay in the loop as much as you can. I mean, that's as good as we can get at that moment.
And Tanya, how do we develop policies to support these children and support these parents? Because I know that you've been on both sides of this, but there's certainly methods and policies we could do to mandate that our school districts and schools support our Latino parents more.
I feel like it really comes down to the collaboration of so many different people that are impacted by education. So, it's, in my opinion, it's not enough for an education policy analyst to work on policy. It involves, educators, it involves people in the field, it involves administrators, it involves the superintendents at their levels, it involves the parents heavily, just like Eva was saying. I think, like, at least in my experience, like, parents were the ones that were able to move the most things, because even as a teacher, sometimes, even our administrators didn't even want to listen to us. But when parents get involved, there's a different level of, attention that is given to some of the things that students need. And a lot of our families, they trust wholeheartedly. Oh, voy a mandar a mi hijo a la escuela. Like, let me, let the school teach them what they're going to teach them. But, sometimes as parents, we have to, figure out, what is it that that my kid is going through? And, like, can I even foster a relationship with the teacher? And, hopefully a teacher will, open their arms to the families. But, it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of proactiveness from both ends. So I think that's what's needed for good policy to be created, is for all of these different spheres of people to come together and know that at the end of the day, we're all working for the same thing. And we can't continue to, be siloed in our own little spheres. Parents need to be involved. We want to hear from the students. We need to have educators in the policy world. These are the things that really start changing and shifting things.
As we start wrapping up this episode of Found in Translation, we could have these women on for hours. I know there's so many elements to this, and we'll bring y'all back. I mean, this education piece, we could just, there's nothing more important. Well, I guess the planet, I guess the environmental stuff, but we don't take care of our children. This is their futures, and they deserve so much. I'm just amazed on the flip side of it with the modern technology, how smart these young kids are nowadays. My God, they know so much. And I think the last comment I have on this segment is, let's find policies, let's find mechanisms, let's continue to support our young people. Let them lead the way on this. They know their needs, they know their potential. And I just think about, the leadership that's happening with our young people across the country, whether it's our dreamers on that level, whether it's these young people that are advocating for common sense gun reform, and then a variety of issues. Our young people leading the way. And so let's support them and hear their voice and bring them to the table when we're talking about the future of education in this country. As we start wrapping this up, Eva, give us any final thoughts you got. And, it's not all just serious stuff. You're a business owner. Shout out your travel business. Anybody wants to book a trip? This is the person to talk to, one of the great saliceras of our community. So, Eva, anything else on your mind? Anything else you want to shout out? And also, shout out your travel business for sure.
Okay. Last thing I wanted to say about education, especially to the parents, is a lot of times as parents we focus on our little ones. Once they hit like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we tend to fall back thinking that they're old enough. We can't forget about them. That's when they need us the most. So we need to keep involved. Like I said, my son is 17 years old and I am still actively involved. I'm not overbearing, but I am actively involved. I do ask these questions. I do have courageous conversations with him. I don't always attack the school. I always hold him full accountability first and then take it from there. So we need to not forget about our older ones, because we're so quick to stay on our little ones, but as they get older, we need to stay on them as well. So yeah, shout out to Travel Allure. Follow me on Instagram. I'm Eva Travel Allure. If you want to book, I can book individual packages. I do weddings. I do bachelorettes, bachelor, group, families. I pretty much do it all. So hit me up on Eva Travel Allure and DM me, and I can get you anything you need.
Tanya, I'm sure next time your girlfriends throw a big soiree, you need to connect with Eva, because that's her specialty. If the girlies want to do a trip and she's got some great specials, great packages, you got to follow her on Instagram. That's all I got to say about it.
No.
Eva, I've always said, if you ever wanted to start your own travel podcast, girl, I will produce it. We'll get sponsors. I could talk about travel all day. It's a great passion of ours. We went to Jamaica this year, actually. So we'll talk about that next time. Tanya, we got some serious business, because we have an A-lister, Eva Mendez, here with us, but another A-lister, Leonardo DiCaprio, threw down the gauntlet the other day and shared something that a lot of us have always kind of known, but wanted to be polite to our Mexicanos, que pupusas got it on tacos. So talk to us, Tanya. Pupusas, apparently your family in the DC area are kind of like, some of the top dogs in the pupusa game. So for our Salvadorans out there, so talk to us, girl. Talk to us.
No,
I know we have to let that on Mexicans kindly. So Leonardo had to do it for us. Y'all can't get mad at Leonardo.
Leonardo is bae. After that he is a pupusa man, I love. But no, there's no pupusas. Honestly, there's no pupusas that compare to my grandma's. Like, she doesn't have a restaurant or nothing, but I'm telling you, hands down, there's no restaurant that compares to hers. And we're actually, her birthday's coming up, and it's the same month that she's celebrating her 20th anniversary of having become a citizen. So we're hosting like a red, white, and pupusas themed party. So, if anyone can throw down a party like that, it's going to be my family. So
I look forward to the invitation, Tanya. So I think next time we have you two ladies on the show, maybe toward the end of the semester, kind of do a recap thing. Eva, I do the show a couple times a week at the radio station. That's easy enough for you to get there. We'll coordinate with your schedule. And Tanya, I'll get you to Philly. but you got to bring your grandma's pupusas. So if you bring the grub, I'll get you the train ticket. Okay, I'm serious. I got a notary here. I mean, that's a commitment. So definitely, we love to have those conversations, and much love, respect to our Salvadoran brothers and sisters, my Salvies out in the West Coast, Marco, Roxy, and all of our friends out there around the country. It's a wonderful community. I wanted to let people know 2 quick things before we let you go. One is the last few shows have been dedicated to a former colleague of me and Tanya's, Elbert Garcia, who unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago. We're going to celebrate his life this weekend. So much love to you, Albert. Rest in peace. And look out on social media, because I'm going to be in San Francisco next week, and we are finalizing plans to do something. So we may have a special episode, some special content. If you remember, Eva, you were a few years ago, but if you remember a guy named Joe Vasquez, who was a big news reporter here in Philadelphia, he's been out in San Francisco for many years. He's become the big reporter out there. He's one of my homies. So we're going to collaborate on something. So you just leave it out on social media. I'm going to have some content while I'm out in the Bay next week. Thank you all so much for Found Translation Talk Show. Again, whether you're watching it on Facebook, thank you, my Facebook family. Thursday night, you can be watching Netflix. There's probably an NFL football game on. There's a lot going on, and I know a lot of our family and friends take the time to watch us here on the live show, and of course any of our platforms, including the radio show and podcast. Eva Mendez and Placer Mija, we're going to keep working together. Thank you for your leadership as a teacher, an advocate, and entrepreneur. And Tanya, you're part of the fam, so you're going to be a regular on the show. Thank you all so much, Elbert Garcia, my producer.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for watching the Found Translation Talk Show. Peace.
See ya.
See ya.